Here's another rule if you live on the res. I heard about covering mirrors and them being portals. This never really bothered me until recently. Sometimes at night, I would just feel like somebody is watching me. My dresser does have a mirror, but now I just cover it. Maybe it's because of all the research and questions that I have been asking about them. In my tribe, there's 2 rules about mirrors. 1, we don't let our babies look into them until they're about a year. They can see things in them that we can't. No toys or anything that have mirrors for babies. And number 2, never have mirrors facing one another. Apparently mirrors can be portals. For centuries, they cover them at wakes and funerals, so that the spirits of those who passed on will not get lost in them. Did anybody else grow up with this, about covering your mirrors at night? I can hear the pushback. A lot of indigenous people who wear regalia have mirrors on their outfits. I was told by an elder that when you have a mirror on you, it reflects bad energy, bad feelings, or bad thoughts about you, in case someone is trying to do something. That's why a lot of hand game players wear medallions, earrings with mirrors on them, in order to reflect the bad medicine off, especially at powwows and the dances. I even heard that some people try to put love medicine on the women. That's why their outfits have a lot of mirrors. I asked my friend if she ever had a bad experience with them. She did say that one time. This happened in the city. She had mirrors at her front and back doors, so that nothing would follow her. She said after a few months, she found both of them broken. You know what's strange also? The movies that you go see. Not that I have digged into any of that, but I have noticed that whenever some evil, witchcraft, or anything with black magic is being done, why do you think mirrors are always used? Or why do you think people who practice witchcraft have a lot of mirrors in their house? What about y'all? What rules have you heard about them? I'll tell you the same thing an elder told me. If you do have mirrors in your house, cover them before you go to sleep tonight. My grandmother says that her own grandfather, he was just a boy at this time, was asked by this old woman to go with her to Snake Butte. She has a sack full of day-old puppies that she's gonna do away with. When they get to the butte, they're just walking. The old woman tells her grandfather to wait by this huge boulder. She tells him that he is to wait for her no matter how long it takes. She also warns him about coming to look for her, telling him that the place is full of dangerous rattlesnakes, and if one of them bites him, he'll likely die right there. Doing what he's told, he sits there by the rock for what seems like forever, but it was most likely like 20 minutes. Eventually, being a young boy, he gets bored and decides that there's no harm in taking a look to see if the old woman is somewhere around, or if he had been left out there by himself. He goes around the boulder and walks down into the brush. Finally, he comes across the old woman. She has her back to him. Not wanting to be seen, he ducks into some bushes. From there, he watches as the woman is feeding the puppies to some snakes. He then hears her talking to them as if she's having a conversation, even stopping to laugh like she finds something funny. Then, almost like she knows that he's there, she turns to stare right at him, right at where he's hiding. But it's not her face that he sees. It's the head of a snake. And just like that, she swallows down one of those puppies. My grandmother says that he got so scared by what he saw, he turns and runs the 3 miles all the way back to his house without stopping. He never went near that old lady again, and she never said anything to him about it. I got a story about the Monument Valley, Utah area. Growing up, my grandparents took care of my cousin and I. This was while our moms were working. Compared to our moms and uncles, we were spoiled. They told us stories of things they never mentioned to their own kids. One of those things were Skinwalker stories. My cousin and I would pester them until they gave in and told us of their experiences. Some my mom has heard. There is one that her mom never told her. My grandma said that one time when she was younger, she was sleeping with her family in their hogan. I remember she said it happened at the darkest point at night, when the moon sets and the sun won't begin to rise for a few hours. At first, the dogs began to bark and howl like they were going crazy. Inside, she said the whole family began to hear scratching at the door and loud banging noises all around the hogan. After everyone tried to ignore it, as we were all told to do when something like this happens, well, whatever was nearby, it began to scream. It sounded like a woman screaming, my grandma said. My great-grandfather, he decided he had enough, and he went outside to chase away whatever had come. He saw nothing out front, and then he went around the back of the hogan. As he came around the side, that's when he saw a big, black shadow, but he said it was to the point where it was stretched all the way to the top of the hogan, where it was looking in through the smoke hole. She then said that my great-grandpa had never seen or heard about anything like this before, so he actually started screaming at it. He told my grandma later on that its body was starting to get smaller, and it started leaping away into a nearby tree. At first he could make out its figure, but as he approached, it continued shrinking further into the branches. When he finally got close up to it, it was gone. The next morning, my great-grandpa went outside before the rest of the family was awake. He noticed some tracks. They started just a few steps from the hogan, right where the dogs had been going crazy. He said at first, they looked like coyote prints, but the longer he looked at them, the footprints were changing. Some toes were long, like whatever it was had turned its feet backwards before stepping down again. He followed them out into the open field behind the hogan. Out there, he saw more prints, but then he lost track of them. Grandma said that he ended up going out to see an elder who was actually highly respected, and he lived a few miles away. He told him what they had experienced, from the barking dogs to the shadow looking in through the smoke hole to the weird tracks. The elder told my great-grandpa that things like this don't just happen randomly, that they come with a reason. He said it must have been looking for someone, maybe not him, maybe someone else inside. He told him to burn some cedar and juniper inside the hogan, to walk around it while praying, and to keep the ashes from the fire inside a small pouch by the door. He also told great-grandpa that if he hears the noises again, to not go outside, and to not open the door, not even for family, and they all did exactly what they were told. A few weeks later, when the family was sleeping, the dog started to bark again, but then, all of a sudden, just stopped. The next morning, Grandma said that everybody felt the hogan different. She couldn't explain it, but she said it just felt different. Great-grandpa went back to the elder, and he said he would come by in a few days. The elder came, and he performed a ceremony to seal the hogan, and they ended up moving. Apparently, when there's been repeated visits from things such as spirits, skinwalkers, or other things, it's better to just seal it. I got a few more stories from my grandma. It's similar to what happened here. My grandma said something was following them, unless they were just at the wrong place, at the wrong time. Let me know if you would like to hear them. Thanks. You don't know true fear until you spend the night alone in a hogan, in the middle of the rest with no access to a vehicle, a phone, or even a neighbor. No radio, nothing. I mentioned before how my grandma said they ended up moving after an elder came and sealed the hogan that they were living in. Remember, They were told by the elder that repeated visits from spirits, skinwalkers, or other things, it's better to seal it rather than stay and risk it. At least you're in the comfort of your own home. You got electricity. But try being in the Hogan in the middle of the res, praying the whole night for daylight to come, watching the door, expecting it to open at any moment. No dogs to warn you, and all you got is a fire stick and possibly an axe. Grandma said that this is what they had to go through every night before they ended up moving. She said it's nothing compared to having electricity at the power of a button, TVs, Wi-Fi, Hot Pockets. The only comfort you knew that was coming was the first crack of daylight, and having that view was something else. Years went by and she said nothing else happened. She eventually met my grandpa, got together and had 8 children. At some point my grandpa got a job at a nearby mining site. My grandpa was in charge of watching over things during the night, and my grandma would often bring him food or stop by to check on him. They lived nearby in a temporary setup, but she did have a bit of a walk to get to where he was working. She said there was a cave along the way with minecart tracks that came out of it. A lot of times the minecarts were filled with large rocks and debris from the digging. Sometimes they weighed up a few tons. The minecarts themselves were very heavy as well. One night, she was on her way to see my grandpa, and as she came near the cave, she became aware that something was following her. She said she could hear shuffling noises coming from behind the minecarts that she was walking alongside. The moon was bright, so that was the only source of light. So when she turned around to see what was following her, all she could make out was a long black figure that ran on all fours like a dog. She knew right away it was something that doesn't belong there. And knowing these things feed on fear, she began to pray for courage and protection as well. As a side note, I guess our grandparents and elders back in the day had no fear, because I'm not sure that I, or even other people I know, would be doing these trips at night. Grandma said the figure ran beside her and then went up ahead. In the process, it knocked over a minecart full of rubble. She said whatever it was went into the cave and it didn't follow her. Grandma said this happened the first time, and she told my grandpa about it, and they ended up praying. Now remember, years had passed from the whole incident with the sealing of the Hogan, so she said she hadn't experienced anything among these things. But then, these incidents started picking up again, and even though she continued walking that same path, she said sometimes she could hear someone calling out to her by her own name. She said sometimes walking through the area it smelled like an animal had died. But the creepiest thing that made her stop going to take my grandpa food, or just join him, was when these occurrences started happening more often, like daily. So grandpa advised my grandma to just stay at home and to just pray, because apparently it wasn't just her. Around the same time, my grandpa said he had some scary experiences as well, especially working there overnight. He just hadn't said anything to my grandma at that time, because he didn't want to bring more attention to it. If you think what happened to my grandma was scary, evil, or whatever, what my grandpa told us that actually made him quit his job was worse. Much worse. So my grandpa got that job of being at the mining site overnight. As I said, his job was to keep an eye on things during the night. He told us he would often have a book to read so he could pass the time. The only place that had an actual light for him to read was a small bathroom that was built standing all by itself. It was convenient for him. He said he would put the toilet lid down and sit on top of it while he read. He told us that one night he was reading his book. He said he was really into it that he had paid no attention to the sound of someone walking around him. At first he ignored it. There were all sorts of noises at night. The wind, maybe an animal, but you could always tell when it was someone versus an animal. You could tell because of the pattern of the noise. This time when he tried to focus to distinguish the steps, he couldn't hear them no more until he heard the footsteps right in front of the door. He stood still for a moment. He said he knew someone was standing right behind the door. So he said, "Can I help you?" There was no response. He stood up. He grabbed the doorknob. He then pushed the door open. And no one was there. Nobody. Now Grandpa said that he brushed it off, and maybe he was just hearing noises. Maybe it was the fact of him working overnight. Regardless, he got out, made a few rounds, and then he would go back and read his book again. About an hour or two passed, and he heard the footsteps again. Same thing, getting closer. He put the book down, and this time he wanted to know if it was someone pulling a prank. Except, when the footsteps came to the door, someone was trying to open it. He quickly unlocked it, swung the door open so fast that he almost hit Grandma. It was Grandma bringing him food. At this point, Grandma chimes in and tells us that she noticed right away that he looked startled, shaken up almost. She asked him if he was alright, and he said yes. That's when she told him about what she had experienced on the way there, about this thing running behind her and running into the cave. And together, they decided to pray. They sat there for a while after. They were eating and keeping each other company. Those nights there were some of the only times they had alone together, so they tried to make the most of it. After some time she left, and he would walk her the furthest he could without leaving the mining site. He would then make his rounds. He wouldn't find anything. Then he would go back to reading in the little bathroom. Grandpa said that he experienced some weird things while there. He didn't really tell my grandma because she didn't want to scare her, even though looking back, she was also experiencing things walking to him. One night, while he was reading, there was a sudden banging on the door. It startled him so bad that he said he almost dropped the book as it fumbled in his hands. He jumped up, flung the door open. Again, nothing. Except this time, there was a single set of muddy footprints leading right up to the door, stopping, and then nowhere else. He knew there must be a trickster spirit around this area. He said most of the time that's what they're trying to do. He said they don't do stuff to random people unless you cause them to, or if you give them attention or have a reason to. Now, the last time Grandma ever brought him food, she showed up, shaking. Grandpa said he could tell that something wasn't right, so they sat down and ate and talked. And that's when she said that, on the way there, from the moment that she entered the mining site, everything felt off. At first she heard the footsteps behind her, but as she got closer to where he was, whatever was behind her started matching her pace. When she stopped, this thing stopped. When she sped up, this thing also sped up. She said she started praying, but no matter how much she prayed, it wouldn't stop. And if anything, it got worse. She said it got to the point where she could hear somebody breathing right behind her neck. By the time that she got to where Grandpa was at, she couldn't handle it. He told her not to worry, that he was going to walk her all the way back home. And so that's what he did. He then turned around and made the walk back to the mine alone. He said nothing happened on the way back, no footsteps. But the whole time he knew somebody or something was watching him. He had the feeling. He knew it. And the following day was actually his last day there. They ended up moving because of what happened the following day. Well, the very last thing that happened, the thing that made my grandpa walk away from that job, he was sitting down in that little bathroom again, reading his book, when it started. At first there was one heavy bang on the door. He thought maybe it was the wind slamming something that came loose. But then it happened again. Louder. Then, the scratching. That's when he decided to stand up. He was about to open the door when the light started to flicker, turning off and on. The banging got louder, faster. At this point, the whole door began to rattle. It started shaking so much that it sounded like it was about to come off the frame. He didn't know what to do, so the only thing he did was pray. He said he doesn't remember how long these noises went on for, but he said it felt like an hour, and the door wasn't shaking no more. He said that was it for him. He closed his book. Fuck this. And he ended up walking away. As he did. He didn't look back at first. He said he just started walking, praying. But when he finally made it out the mining site, he told me he didn't want to, but against his better judgment, he looked back. That's when he saw them. 3 figures, standing, the silhouettes of 3 men. They were long and skinny, and he said that their heads were shaped weird, like that of an animal. All 3 of them were standing, not moving, just looking at him. He said he felt like his heart was gonna drop when one of them raised its hand and waved at him, almost like saying goodbye. Grandpa said that at this point, he started running like he hadn't ran since he was a boy. He made it back home, and he left that job after that, and he never went back. He didn't even go back to collect his money because he didn't want to go near that area. All these stories were shared to me and my cousin by my grandparents when we were kids. I'm now in my 20s, and a couple of years ago, I was telling my grandpa about a skinwalker that I heard about from a few different friends. They all told me that it seems to live around Eagle Mesa, and most sightings are around that area. They say it resembles some sort of dog, and that it jumps around on its hind legs. That's when my grandpa told me that the stories that he had shared with me since I was a kid, and the experiences him and my grandma went through, happened around that area, which is actually where the mining site is at. He told me to stay away from that area. My grandpa is a Christian man now. I know there might be differences in how our parents raised us and what he leans towards now, but there is something that I agree with him on. He said that demons and such only want attention. He said not to give them what they want, that if I do feel afraid, I should pray and to have faith. Then he proceeded to, once again, tell me the same stories I just shared. But every time that he did, he would reveal more details. It's funny, every time that he told me the same stories, he would add more to it. But one thing I know for sure is that they were always consistent. And when someone is not telling the truth, they make up a story, and you can always tell because it always changes. But with my grandparents, it was the opposite. Like this last time that he told me, and maybe this was why it was bothering them, because the book that he was reading was the Bible. This story was experienced by Sam and me. I'm often reluctant to share this story with most people, as the subject matter is unexplainable and rather strange. I don't want to be viewed as the superstitious nut, but having guided all across the country and having extensive experience in many environments around the US, I feel like I have the authority to tell this story. What I'm trying to say is that I've been around in the deep dark hollows all across North America and have never experienced something so strange as that night. I don't fancify my experiences in the woods, nor do I hopefully imagine there's something more to a twig breaking, as anyone who spent a good deal of time in the woods knows. Eventually you'll experience something daring or fantastic. I am a hunter first and foremost, and to a hunter there's always an explanation, a reason to the wilderness, It's how we identify patterns and exploit an animal's rhythm to make a successful hunt. As a hunter, you're sort of a woodsman detective, piecing together clues to set yourself up for success. Let's get into it. It was early summer, and I was itching to go camping. I had recently received a new tent, and was eager to use it. I called up my good buddy Sam, and we planned out our camping adventure. We considered going up to the highlands, or even south into North Carolina. After debating it, we decided it would be more fun to camp somewhere else, somewhere that we wouldn't run into any other people, deep in the woods far from anyone else, where we could bushcraft, shout, and bring a gun without fear of scaring the people camping next to us. While we both lived in the woods, I definitely had access to the most remote stretch of woods between us, so we loaded up our stuff and began hiking, deep into the valley below my childhood home. The hike was almost completely straight down a steep hillside, deep into a hollow that held a small patch of flatland, a floodplain area, and creek. The small creek that ran gave the area a beautiful ambience. The early signs of summer were visible all around, and the weather was great. We hiked until we felt the need to start gathering firewood before nightfall. Behind us was a steep hillside that rose into the west for miles. In front of us was the creek, and to the left the start of another ridge and hillside that rose high into the east and north. To our right, the valley we were in. It continued to go down, cutting a deep valley, and on the other side of the creek, another ridge that was separated by a small stream from the ridge to the left. It rose into the west and to the south. These two ridges in front of us ran for miles, and the little valley formed by the small creek split these ridges for a long ways up until it hit the spring head. This is important for later in the story. We started building a camp by clearing the brush and leaves away and constructing a small fire pit. I placed a tarp on the ground to separate my tent from the damp earth. Remember this, the tarp extended out roughly a foot on each side of my tent. Sam had a hammock that he planned to sleep in. I only ever camped in a hammock once, and it didn't go great, but I didn't say anything to him, thinking that maybe he would enjoy it. So we gathered a hefty load of firewood, consisting of some reasonably dry stuff. It was shaping up to be a really nice camping trip. I have spoken about the joy of being out here before, so I won't beat a dead horse, but it was really nice to be away from people. Sam and I sat around the fire and shot the shit until the sun went down. Now, one of the things Sam and I have always bonded on, shows about Bigfoot. We're both skeptics, and I would say that we hold a similar or the same opinion on the subject. Our interest is less about believing in Bigfoot, but rather we just find the subject quite silly and a fun thing to joke about. So I brought up the idea to Sam. He laughed and thought it was a great idea. So we began doing the stuff that they do in the Finding Bigfoot TV show. We started with the classic tree knocks. A tree knock, for those unaware, is when you use a stick to beat on a tree, making a loud knocking sound that echoes through the forest. They say that Bigfoot communicates this way. We didn't think anything of it at all. As I said before, we didn't really believe. We were just joking around. So we began by knocking on the trees, and then stopping and listening for a response. After a few times of doing this, and hearing nothing, I began to think of a joke to crack, and something else to do. Before I could open my mouth, we heard it clear. A tree knock, far off somewhere on the ridge to the left. I looked at Sam and said, "Dude." Sam just looked back at me in surprise. I then did some more knocks, and we listened again. Then off in the distance, we heard more knocks in response. Then the other ridge to the right, we began hearing knocks. At this point, Sam was beginning to get freaked out a bit, and he was perplexed as to what it could be. At this time, I was such a hard skeptic. I carried on and insisted that it was a person or a woodpecker, but who in the world would be out there, deeper in the woods than we are, on private land at that? What woodpecker makes 3 loud booming knocks on the tree that sound exactly like the knocks we made? Sam said in his rebuttal. I ignored these arguments and held strong to the fact that there is no Bigfoot, and then insisted that we make some noises, some whoops and howls just like they do on TV. Sam wasn't that excited for this idea, being the humbler and smarter one of that night, knowing sometimes there are certain things you don't mess with. But at that time, I was full of piss and vinegar, and stubborn as hell about the fact that Bigfoot is not real. I also had brought a gun with me, and I was sure that I could fight off anything we would need to fight off. We started howling into the woods. It was dark that night, being a new moon, and beyond the firelight, you couldn't see a damn thing. So we would make noises, and we would just wait, listening for a response. After a few times, the excitement of, what the hell was that, started to fade, and my logical, rational, science-based theory of the woodpecker began to appear true. Out in the distance came one of the strangest sounds that I ever heard. A howl. Not a canine, not an owl's hoot. Sam's eyes were as big as backhoe tires, and even I was finding it hard to reason what that was. Despite this, I continued my ignorant stubbornness, and I let out another howl. Off to the left ridge, it replied to us again. The clearest ape sound that I ever heard, as if it was being recorded by some research team in the Congo. I looked at Sam, myself feeling more curious and excited than anything else. Then something truly unexplainable and spooky happened. More noises began on the ridge to the right and further down the valley, and they were not random. They had etiquette, as if they were talking back and forth with each other. The one to the left would howl, the one to the right would whoop and howl. The first would respond, and then the one way down the valley would chime in. Sam was really freaked out now, and he began considering if we should leave. I, being the stubborn idiot, claimed there was a bunch of owls. We were both fucking raised in these woods. I heard owls before, and you're gonna tell me that this was an owl? Have you ever in your life heard an owl that sounded like a fucking ape? Sam said. Well, no, but there's no way Bigfoot is real. It has to be a bunch of owls speaking to each other. There's nothing else it could be, I replied, half laughing, and also in disbelief of what was going on that night. Sam and I kind of bickered for a minute over it, and then we decided that the most wise thing to do was to stop antagonizing whatever it was in the woods, miles around us, knocking and making all sorts of noises. It wasn't too long after that we decided to go to bed. I crawled into my tent, and Sam into his hammock. We left the fire going, and every time the fire died down, the woods came to life. Whether it was paranoia or paranormal, something was stirring up. All around camp, we could hear what sounded like things being thrown, and footsteps. Here and there, we would hear another knock or another howl coming from a new spot. Sam would leap out of his hammock and throw loads of wood onto the fire and make it as big as possible. He would then go lay down to sleep. This repeated about 3 more times. Every time the fire died, things got scarier and scarier. A few times Sam would say, "Did you hear it?" And every time I would just blame it on possums nearing camp, maybe hoping to find some food scraps. Well, about the 3rd time, Sam ran out of firewood, meaning that this time when the fire died, leaving us to the dark void of the Appalachian holler. I remember I had fallen asleep before the fire died, and after it died, there was so much stirring around camp. I began to wake up, thinking I was having some sort of nightmare, when I finally fully sobered and realized that my dream was pleasant. It was real. All the sounds and things that go bump in the night. The woods around us had become loud, with unexplainable movements. The sounds of movement of a few different large things. The knocking had stopped, which didn't comfort me, because all the new sounds were right outside my door. There was maybe a 30-yard perimeter around camp that the sounds did not cross. Suddenly, an extremely loud crashing began through the twigs, leaves, and branches. It was something big, running full sprint through the woods, starting maybe 50 yards away and running straight towards our camp. It grew louder and louder until the sound of crushing leaves turned to crinkling tarp. Whatever this thing was now standing on the tarp my tent was situated on. I was frozen, like a child, frozen in fear, eyes wide open. My heart was basically pounding out of my chest. That's when I heard high above my tent, not near the ground, not 4 feet up, but high above my tent, the most terrifying sound that I ever heard. It was the sound of a gorilla, or how they do it in the Planet of the Apes movie. The creature turned around and ran back the way it came, back into the darkness of the night. Sam practically leaped out of his hammock and said, "I know you heard that." I replied with, "Yeah, let's get the fuck out of here." I slid around into the chamber of my gun, and I crawled out of the tent. We both got busy, grabbing only our essentials, and so we started out the woods, using shitty dim flashlights. We made our way up the hill, looking behind us, and trying to move faster without running. We ended up hiking a long ways, and by the time that we made it back to the house, it was far past midnight. We never did see what it was, and we never did hear anything else after that. But whatever it was, it scared us enough to make us hike out in the dead of night and leave all of our gear out there. We ended up going back the next morning in full daylight to gather our things. Looking back, I wish we had surveyed the area for tracks or some clue as to what it was, but at that time, we didn't want to be down there for any longer than we had to. Having been some years since this happened, I would go down there in a heartbeat and not think anything of it. When I come home, I always feel a sense of ease in the woods. It feels like a weight is lifted off your shoulders, knowing there are no cougars or grizzly bears to worry about. For my Western outdoors people, have you noticed that you've been stalked before? All these mountain lions are some of the sneakiest creatures in the animal kingdom, and just because you never noticed it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I myself have been stalked. It's a feeling that will stick with you and definitely put you on edge. I have a colleague who guides Western big game in New Mexico who told me a story once that during a hunt, he had a fellow guide spotting for him, and that guy noticed a cougar stalk my friend through a grove of trees before giving up. My friend never had the slightest idea that he was being stalked. I believe for an outdoorsman, it is actually inevitable. As far as grizzly country, it's a similar feeling, but a bit different. Most bear encounters happen because you surprise the bear in thick woods. I have many friends from my time in Alaska who will share stories of being charged by a monster grizzly. You're just hiking along, and then out of nowhere, 800 pounds of death is blasting straight towards them. And everybody says the same. If you spend enough time out there, it will happen, eventually. Lucky for me, this didn't happen during my time in Alaska. I avoided known bear hangouts, but the few times that I spent time in bear country, I always had this jack-in-the-box anxiety, just waiting for it to happen. What is funny though is that, despite that weight being lifted initially, an old feeling always comes back. I know it's not some sort of psychological thing having to do with that patch of woods, especially because I feel it in most places in Appalachia. It's a feeling of being watched, a feeling that something is there. Most of the time that I experienced this, I had a gun, and I think to myself, you're the most badass thing out here. Yet, I can never shake that anxiety. My brother, without ever having heard this story, asked me over the phone one day, "But have you ever felt creeped out in the woods below the house?" I don't know what it is, But every time that I go down there, I feel like somebody is watching me, and I get filled with dread. Hearing him say that sent shivers down my back, simply because I always dismissed it. I have swept the story under the rug for so long, telling myself it was just a bear. But to hear my brother, who is a Marine, certify to me that I was not simply being scared. I have only ever felt this in two regions of the country, Appalachia and the redwood forest of North California. Now some of you may be reading this thinking that I'm just a nutjob Bigfoot believer, and this is why I don't like sharing the story. But let me just end this. I have no idea what it was that made those calls that night. I also have no idea what it was that busted into our camp. But I just want to tell you that this story is true, and you can make your own decision as to what you think it was. But being an experienced woodsman, never have I experienced something like that since, and I have no explanation for it. Those were the events that transpired that night, and I'll let you make of that what you will. The scariest thing to happen to me was when I was on my way home from being out of town one night, when my dad called and asked if I could shut some irrigation valves off. Basically like shutting off the water at the start of each row. We ran about like 20 to 30 at a time. I didn't have a flashlight, so I just pulled my pickup to the first valve and shut them off by the light from the headlights. As I'm working my way down, the only light coming is from the truck itself. And then about halfway down, it goes kinda dark. That's when I whip around and notice something tall enough to reach the headlights. And they are completely blocked out, the passenger side light. And just as I saw it crossing over, it then blocked the driver's side light before moving along. Like 3 seconds in all, and it never made a sound. I told myself it was just a big coyote. However, the most unnerving thing was actually in broad daylight, when I was planting trees with my dad. We farm along a river and a group of stray dogs were attacking something in the water at a distance. We had our dogs attacked a few times, so it caught my attention pretty quickly, thinking it might be one of our dogs being drowned. I banged on the side of the truck and yelled at my dad to reverse up the riverbank, which he did. I then get close enough to throw a decent-sized rock at the dogs, which causes them to scatter. The poor dog that was getting attacked, it was kind of struggling over to the bank, opposite of me. And then, it jumps out about 10 feet away. It's not a fucking dog that I ever seen. It rises out of the water and partially stumbles into a bush before stopping and looking back at me. It doesn't have any hair, about chest height. It was weird. It was like a dog, but not really. It had legs like a deer, somewhat of a dog's head, like it had a big snout, much of it blocked and shaped like a dog, big ears that stood straight up, like a dog again, but just a little too big to look natural. It stumbled into some thicker brush, and I jumped back into the truck, and my dad and I, we both kinda just said, "What the fuck was that?" He got onto a big chupacabra kick for like 2 months after that, which I do admit, some of the reports and details online do kinda look like what I saw, but really, I still have no idea what it was. For context, my tribe, specifically the Kickapoo tribe, were spread out through Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and Mexico. I have family everywhere, but I live in Oklahoma. Our tribe still practices the traditional ceremonies. Basically, it's still old school. Outsiders are not welcome, and nobody writes anything down. We have several tribal members who don't even speak English or know anything about what's going on around the world. We don't really talk about stuff that I'm going to share with you. It's considered taboo. Honestly, if my family found out that I'm sharing this, they would most likely get very angry with me. I might ask about it someday, but the only one with more answers is most likely my dad. He doesn't really talk about taboo things like that, and it's hard to ask anything. So why am I sharing this? Well, I figure that as long as I don't give exact details, it will be fine. Some of the stuff I give out is actually public information, and it's not that hard to find out because we're not one of the bigger tribes within North America. I know some tribes here in America don't like sharing anything, but I always thought that if you don't share or pass down information or the stories or the practices, then how will our culture continue if it just dies out? Anyways, when I was young, there was a ceremony that had to take place in Mexico every year. All families essentially have to make a trip down there. Out of respect for my tribe, I won't include exactly what happens. All you need to know is that my grandma has a house down there that everybody goes to. There's a lot of us, more than the house can hold. It's actually kind of cheap to build over there. So my grandmother had a smaller house built on the same property. My family, my aunt's family, and my uncle's family were there. My grandmother is a superhero, so she is helping another group of family with their ceremony, since all the knowledge is verbally, and my mom was taking care of ours. The entire res in Mexico is located in the middle of nowhere, and once you get there, it's another 2 hours until you get to the actual property. You see, the land, or the res I should say, was granted to the Kickapoo at the Hacienda de Nacimiento, near the town of Musquis in the state of Coahuila in 1850. The hacienda occupied by the Mexican Kickapoo, and is called by them El Nacimiento de la Tribu Kickapoo, or in English meaning the birthplace of the Kickapoo tribe. The property contains around 17,000 acres of land sourced with water from the Rio Sabinas. It's really big, and there are mountains within walking distance. My grandmother's house are actually at the foot of one. And you guessed it, there are no good stories that involve those mountains. They're considered a taboo place. We don't even go up there except to go hunting. A ceremony must be done for your protection if you do decide to go. So I was maybe 8 or 9 at the time. My aunt lives in Texas, and my sisters and I don't get to see our cousins very often. So these trips were the closest thing we had a family vacation, even though they were nothing but long work days. There's no electricity there. As someone who grew up pretty close to Oklahoma City, I sometimes forget how dark it can be when there are no cities nearby. No cars on the road. Just finding the 2 small houses on property can be difficult if no one has any fires going. There is a window in each room that is barred, and all the doors are made of steel. It's not pretty, but it's necessary since no one lives in these houses most of the time. The new house is different. The windows are still barred, but they can open. The old house windows are just solid glass. My sisters and I were playing with my cousin E and M in the new house. M is almost the same age as me, and E is 2 years younger. It was well after sundown, and the headlights on my uncle's truck was the only light. It was getting late, and I say we, but really just the parents, had a long day of work the next day, so everyone started moving for lights out. My family was in the old house, so me and my siblings headed to the room, and that's when it happened. I woke up to screaming. So did everyone else. You would think I would have been panicked, but no. I was a kid who was just woken up by what was clearly E screaming at the new house. I wanted to yell at him to shut up. I wasn't scared until my dad, very strong and quiet, walked into our room and told us to stay. We don't disobey my dad, so we did. We went to the window and looked outside. My dad was talking to my aunt and uncle, along with some of my older cousins, and they were walking up and down the fence on our property with flashlights. It was too dark to see anything else. After an hour or so, we started getting tired, so we went back to sleep, but the adults were all awake until sunrise. I ended up tracking E and M down to try to find out what happened. E wouldn't talk about it, and M didn't know. He said E saw something through the window, and we all got a little creeped out. On the last day, I asked my cousin G, was one of the cousins who was walking up and down the fence that night, and as a kid, he was something of a hero to me. He was a genuine tall muscle badass native with a death stare and everything. He ended up telling me when my sisters weren't around. Apparently, it was hot in the new house, so my cousins had opened all the windows. E was sleeping on the floor next to me and was awoken by something touching his face. An old, pale, naked woman was sticking her head through the bars and was looking down at him. Her hair was long and gray, and it's actually what ended up waking him up. He said she was smiling. Being even younger than me, he screamed and screamed until everyone came. After that, they looked around but never found anything. I was creeped out, but was pretty sure that he was just having a bad dream. So here I am years later. I haven't gone back to Mexico or Texas in a long time. To be honest, I'm not really involved in the traditional part of my tribe anymore. My sisters have kind of taken over now. I still help whenever I can, but I do have a pretty busy job. Just out of curiosity, I called my mom to ask about it. Surely I wasn't the only one who had thought that he was just having a bad dream. Why was everyone taking him so serious? I really wish I wouldn't have gone asking, because now I have this feeling in my stomach when I think about it. My mom told me this wasn't the first time the old woman has been seen, and she was wrong. They found some footprints going from the window to the fence headed towards the mountains. Judging from the footprints they found, she was visiting every window on the property. Mind you, it was in the middle of nowhere, in the pitch black. On a personal note, I think it was a witch most likely. Our tribe still being traditionally strong is both a blessing and a curse. Like in other tribes, like for example in the Navajo tribe, there are skinwalkers. I want to say that the old lady is likely a skinwalker who preys on people who live close to the mountains. Maybe. I have heard from my family and others, and even had other weird experiences down in the rest in Mexico that still make me nervous when I go outside when it's dark. And it doesn't help that my dog always insists on going outside during the middle of the night, and he makes me chase him around to get him back inside. Even if it's not a skinwalker, there's some really creepy things going around in that whole area, especially around the mountains. I did talk with a friend who lives in Oklahoma, and he said it might be a stikini. I'm sure the most famous native witch that you know is the Skinwalker, but in Oklahoma, they call something similar the stikini, shapeshifters of pure evil. By day, they have the look of a human, blending in with everyone else. But when nighttime comes, a transformation takes place. These people end up forming into an owl-like monster. Or maybe it was an Ishikitini, people who use supernatural powers to harm others and are able to take the shape of a horned owl. I know in some other native tribes down in Mexico, they call it the Nagual. It's intriguing, and maybe not a coincidence, that many natives share stories of similar type of witches. These creatures or monsters or whatever are often believed to be just humans who practice a form of witchcraft that grants them such powers, and are not actual monsters. Maybe the generations before us saw and knew things that we can't fully understand today. These stories and beliefs have been passed down as part of our cultural memory, a reminder of the things that our ancestors encountered. So if you ever visit some native land or a reservation, whether that's in New Mexico, the Navajo Nation, or Arizona, Oklahoma, Dakotas, or even down in Mexico, it may sound like they're everywhere, and who knows, maybe they are. Just be safe and be respectful of the traditions and stories. You never know what might be out there, and it's always better to be cautious and respectful than to dismiss what is actually true. Stay safe. I used to live in the outbacks in Kentucky. There's a lot of woods around and many wild animals, which gives me a pretty good feeling every day. Well, almost every day. Before I get into it, let me give you some pointers of my home so you can better understand the situation. It's pretty secluded where I live. The closest town is a good 30-minute drive away, making my old bus rides over an hour long in the mornings, and our neighboring houses are rather spaced out. The land is pretty nice considering we built the house ourselves. We have a small garden, a chicken coop area, rabbit hutches, and a pig pen. My family's 2 dogs protected these animals, while mine stayed with the pigs since one was pregnant at that time. We only have about 6 acres of backwoods land before we get to one of those signs that say, no hunting, private property, that has some barbed wire fencing all around. Even though it does no good, as I later found out a tree had fallen and broke part of it. Now, even though we hear coyotes all the time, we never actually find signs of them. Just raccoons, rabbits, and squirrels, and lots of deer tracks. Going out there during late fall or winter and beginning of spring was something that I enjoyed doing, even though my family had restrictions, as I wasn't allowed out there at nighttime. Now, some of you might find this next part disturbing. Whenever an animal of ours died, I was required to take it out back and dump it near that fence to make sure that nothing got too close to our property. Well, at least the predators. The walk through the woods was always fun, but I did sometimes feel like somebody was watching me. I'm sure it was the environment that I was in. Of course, Karma, my German Shepherd mix, was always with me when I did this. I never had him on a leash or anything, something I deeply regretted after that night. I brought him home because I trust his senses more than my own. Whenever I got the sense that somebody or something was watching me out there, Karma would just stop walking. Whenever I see the fur on his back raise, I'll toss the animal as far as possible and head back home. Call me scared or anything, but I'd rather be careful. Now that I explained something, I'll get on to the point of the story. One of our prized roosters had died suddenly, and we hadn't noticed it dead in the chicken coop floor until it was time to put the chickens up for the night. When my older brother opened the bag, we saw that it was dead. We assumed this explained why Cookie, one of the family dogs, was acting strange. Even though it was about 7 p.m., and I didn't want to go into the woods since it was still early in the fall, which means that there are big spider webs out there. But my mom demanded I go take it out to where it's supposed to go. I got on my boots and sweater to prevent mosquito bites and headed out to get my dog. His pen with the pig was only a few feet away from the back steps, so it was easy to get to him if there was an emergency. Once I opened the pen, he shot out, excited to run around as I held the Walmart bag with the dead rooster inside. I started making my way to the woods with him. He knew where we were going, and he followed quickly at my side before getting in front of me. He did that often, going off and stopping to wait for me. As a 17-year-old with no friends, besides the ones that I made online, I found this to be rather sweet of him and would smile at the fact that he would wait, as if he didn't want me to be left alone. "Alright, Karma, here I come." I chuckled as I saw him standing at the bottom of the small hill, just staring at me. I kept walking, keeping an eye on him. Once I got closer to the drop-off area, I noticed that he was straying further and further away. So I let out a high-pitched whistle sound. He comes whenever I whistle, except this time, he didn't. He raised his head up, ears perked up, and his attention was somewhere else. That's when the fur on his back had raised slightly. He bolted. He was never really a barker unless a stranger was in our yard, or our neighbor's dogs ran over, so it surprised me when he barked once before suddenly taking off into the woods. It was then that I noticed the tree had fallen when he jumped onto the tree and over the fence to the private property, chasing whatever it was he had seen. "Karma, get back here!" I yelled as I dropped the bag and chased after him, only stopping when I reached the fence, but he was nowhere to be seen, and his barking stopped. This actually scared me as it was getting dark outside, and all the day animals were falling silent, being replaced by crickets and frogs. I knew I wasn't allowed on this side of the property, so I stood at the fence and called out for him. "Karma, here boy," I called out, feeling frustrated. "Karma, come here," I yelled, in hopes that he would return as the tears began forming in my eyes. "Karma, come back," only for him not to return. I'm naturally a rational thinker and assumed he had gotten too far away to hear me, so I bolted back towards home, feeling out of breath by the time that I got up the small but steep hill. "Mom," I called out as I rushed inside. "He took off and I don't know where he is. He jumped the fence back there. I told you to keep him on a leash when out there." She yelled as she got ready to help me go find him, only to see the sun was basically down. It sets in our backyard, meaning it would be dark in the woods, since the trees would be blocking the sun. "I'm sure he'll come back," she assured me, while looking out the back door. Since it was too dark out back, I decided to walk down the street and call for him. My neighbor had noticed and asked if I was looking for someone, so I told him my dog had ran off into the woods. He nodded and seemed to glance around before disappearing into his backyard. I wasn't really sure if he was going to keep an eye out or not. It had been about 2 hours since he ran off, and he still wasn't back. I mentally cursed myself for not having him on a leash as I went outside to feed the livestock dogs. As I was scooping their food, I thought I heard a high-pitched whistle. My mind was too focused on the fact that Karma was still missing to really think about it as I walked around to the backyard. When I got to Cookie, I heard the faint sound of what sounded like someone in our backwoods saying, "Here, boy." Very quiet, like he was far away or something. I glanced over but saw nothing besides what the moon was showing. Our back porch light wasn't really working, so it wasn't much that I could see. We had just gotten new wood siding up the backyard, so we had to remove the light. I chose to ignore it. I walked over to Sarja and gave her some food when I heard it. "Here, boy," again. Except this time, it was loud. I looked over to the woods again, feeling uneasy before heading inside. I had a few thoughts running through my mind, aside from Karma, of course. One, there was someone in our woods, maybe a neighbor. And two, he seemed to have lost a dog, just like I did. Even though it was a stranger, I still felt the need to go help as I had just lost my dog in those woods too. "Mom," I said as I went inside, "there's someone in the woods," I told her, ushering her to come listen. She stopped doing the dishes and went out to listen as well. She also heard it. "Here, boy." The man never called the dog's name, something I didn't notice at that time, and just proceeded to say, "Here, boy, come back," and "Come here, now." My mom then gave me a stare, looking scared just like I did when I first heard it. "I think we should go help," I said as I grabbed my Winchester BB gun. The actual guns were in the locker that I had no access to, so I figured that this would have to do. "Should we?" she had asked. Before we heard a dog, my heart lifted as I hoped it was Karma. But it was a hound dog, it sounded like, and it was getting further away. My mom's instincts seemed to kick in as she went out there with me. We both knew the dangers of the woods at night, and she began calling out for the dog. I also called out, but to be honest, I was actually looking for Karma, if anything. As we got close to the tree line, we stopped, not wanting to go further down. We noticed as we stopped just before the hill that things were way too quiet. Sure, we heard some nighttime insects, but as we heard the man call out again, he sounded closer. Even though the dog's barking was faint and clearly far away, the leaves on the ground were basically dead, yet there was no crunching noises as whoever was out there was getting closer and closer. The strange thing that we noticed is that there was no flashlight shining around. When our neighbors lost their cat, we saw their flashlights in the woods, so we became skeptical of the fact that this strange man didn't have one, so we decided to stop calling out. Turning around, we headed back up the small path and into the safety of the yard. Our dogs wagged their tails at the sight of us, but it wasn't the same without my dog. We walked along the tree line, staying a few feet back as we looked for some form of light, but we found none. It was then that we heard it. "Come here, boy," in a deep, angry voice. It sounded like it was down some, to the right of us. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck, and we rushed back to the house as our dogs began barking like crazy. their growls being the only noise as everything else was silent. My mom wasn't far behind as we got inside and closed the door, staring out as we turned out the lights inside so if the man entered our yard, he wouldn't be able to see us as we stayed at the glass door. As I thought of how weird this all was, I realized something. He never said the name of what he was looking for. In fact, he said the same words I had said earlier when my dog Karma had ran off. Was he copying me? My thoughts were interrupted as I heard my mom gasp and cover her mouth before she closed the curtains to the door. She had gone pale. Without thinking, I took a peek as I could hear one of our dogs going mad crazy. I saw her growling, so I looked to where she was looking. What I saw was not human. I'm not even sure what I was looking at. Its skin was white. The moon wasn't even needed to see. It was so pale that I was sure it was a ghost at first. Its eyes were sunken into its face. It didn't seem to have a nose and it looked like it was upside down, crawling on its hands and feet, as it was doing a crab walk sort of. But its head was upright. It had an arched back so its stomach was pointing up to the sky as it slowly made its way from the tree line. Its teeth didn't even fit in its mouth as its jaw hung open. A dark slimy tongue was hanging out. As its dark beady eyes looked around, "Come here, boy." It just kept saying, "Come here, boy." Its head twitching as it turned halfway before snapping back upright. It didn't even seem to care about the dogs barking at it. Then, it looked at the house, and I swear for a second that we made eye contact. I couldn't move for the fear that I would see the curtain movements. For what seemed like forever, we were just staring at one another until it twisted its body slowly. The bones seemed to crack and pop as it began standing on its legs. This, whatever it was fucking tall, bony, and its skin was tight around its frame, showing every bone in its lanky body. Some hair was hanging from its elbows, patches all around its chest. Its arms were long and almost seemed to drag on the ground. Long, sharp nails were seen. They were black, but the moonlight made them seem to shine. Its body proportions were just so off. Its legs were normal size, but it had a bent torso like its spine was also messed up. It stood at least 8 feet tall, and I was petrified. How was it able to just twist its body like that? How was a creature like this even alive? I felt like I was gonna piss myself at the sight of this thing. Was this what Karma went after? And what happened to Karma? My whole thought process stopped when I saw it walking towards our house, taking slow strides as its body seemed to sway with each small step it took. "Here, boy." Even though it was hard to hear through the glass, I then saw a flashlight shine around our backyard. Our neighbor was heading over, I assumed, based from where it was coming from. He must have heard our dogs going crazy and came to check it out. Fuck, I thought he was gonna get attacked and mutilated, but the creature screeched and ran back into the trees. Even after it left, I was stuck just staring into the trees until the dogs turned their attention to the front yard. Did it go around? Slowly, I finally stepped away and looked to the door as I heard a knock. My knees felt so weak as I released a breath I wasn't aware I was holding. Mom answered the door and it was our neighbor explaining that he heard our dogs going crazy, just like I thought. I didn't hear much of the conversation as I felt sick and ran to the bathroom, emptying the food that I had just ate hours before. My mom then later started asking me things that night, questions before going to bed about what I saw, and I couldn't answer. She had only seen a glimpse of it. She didn't see the way it moved, the way it was staring at me. Later that night around 2 a.m., our neighbor gave us a call, saying that he saw our dog in his backyard. I ran out there hoping it really was him, and there he was, strutting over to us with his tail between his legs as he knew he was in trouble for running off. But I couldn't be mad. I was just glad that whatever that thing was hadn't gone into him. We ended up moving shortly after that experience, and now live in the city. I guess I thought that by writing this out, the nightmares would stop, but they haven't. I can't get the image of those eyes staring into mine. If you ever go hiking or into the woods or anything, and you hear your own voice, somebody repeating the exact words that you said, ignore it, run away, and don't look back. I kept telling myself it was over when the hinges on the door snapped with the banging. The wood splintered, and with it the wooden door collapsed against the floor. The small screws that held it in place echoed while they rolled down the floor, matching the beating of my heart as it wanted to spring out of my chest. I was stuck in my summer cabin during the winter, snowed in because I was too stupid to leave before the storms came. The Forest Service announced that it was time to leave about 2 weeks ago, because apparently my cabin is located on the top of some mountains that get too much snow during the winter. I always leave on time when the Forest Service announces the closure, but I thought it would be fun to try and stay here over the winter. I mainly wanted to stay here because of the whole COVID lockdown, and with everything closed I thought it would be better. It was something that I had never done before, but I came ready, as I boarded up the lower windows like I always did, to make sure the snow doesn't break through. I also stockpile enough food to last until February, and make sure to call up the power company to make sure that they don't cut me off this year, because I was planning on staying longer. I didn't regret the idea until the first snowstorm. That's when reality hit me. There was no leaving until the snow melted away, and this was only going to grow as it was too cold for it to melt, and there were many more snowstorms coming my way. I spent most of my time building puzzles while listening to the old CDs that I had stored up there. The memories of seeing my wife and children's smiling faces, sitting at this exact table from times long gone, actually brightened up my mood for a moment, but it was short as I wished they were here with me, especially my wife who had died 4 years ago. As I was thinking about her, I heard some scratching coming from the back wall, wondering if an animal was trying to get in. I opened the front door and yelled to scare it off. I then heard the scratching stop, and with a smile, I slowly began to close the door before I heard whispering. It was faint, but it was coming closer. Standing there, I was wondering what was making that sound, and remember I had my CD player on, and that must have been what I heard. So I brushed it off and returned back to working on the puzzle after grabbing a drink from the fridge. After I closed the door, I heard the scratching again coming from the back wall. But this time, I just let it be as it didn't bother me enough. It could possibly just be branches brushing against the side.
Dad, come look at this.
A voice whispered from behind me. A tingle struck down my spine as I looked back to see no one was there. The crazy thing is that the voice seemed so familiar, but one that I hadn't heard in so long. "Hello?" I asked the now quiet cabin after turning off the CD player.
Dad, it's cold. Help me.
The voice said again, and it hit me as this was the voice of my daughter when she was younger. "Sarah, is that you?" I asked, wondering what in the hell was going on.
Dad, it's cold out here. Please let me inside.
The voice said again, but more clear. Now I knew for a fact that this was not just my imagination. Was my daughter actually calling for me? Wait, no. She's married and is expecting to have a baby girl in spring, so there's no possible.
Are you going to let me die, Dad? Just like you let Mom?
My body froze like a statue as I wondered if this was just my imagination, or something much darker.
Please, it's so cold.
"Who are you?" I asked.
It's me, Sarah, your daughter. Please open the door or I'm going to freeze out here.
The voice said from the other side of the door. It sounded like a robot. At the time, I slowly tried to think of what to do, and I grabbed the metal rod used for stirring the fire and gripped it in my hands tightly while moving away from the door. "You're not my daughter. Get the hell off my property," I screamed while backing away from the front door. The voice changed, and it shocked me to my core.
Honey, why won't you let us in? Sarah wants to warm up next to the fire, and I want to see your smiling face again.
Upon hearing this, I nearly dropped the metal rod to the ground. as it was the voice of my wife, and I took a step ahead thinking it was actually her. My mind started to flood with happy memories until I remember attending her funeral. The voice outside wasn't my wife. It couldn't be. What do you want? Please, whoever's out there, I'm just an old man. I got nothing here that you can steal. Please, leave me alone.
Honey, don't you recognize me? Please take the boards off the window so we can see each other.
Shocked to my very core and having no idea on what to do next, I stayed quiet while moving towards the bathroom. I snuck inside and locked the door, just hoping whatever out there would go away. Was someone trying to mess with me? But how did they even get out here with all that snow? It's not too bad yet, so it's possible someone could get up here. But who? Who would be on the other side of that door? I heard the voice say something that I couldn't hear through the bathroom door. And right before this, I heard a large bang on the door. It was followed by another, and another, and I could hear the hinges starting to loosen up. I kept telling myself it was over when the hinges on the door snapped with the banging. The wood splintered, and with it the wooden door collapsed against the floor. The small screws that held it in echoed. I could hear the words echoing
Come out.
through the insulated log walls. I held my breath listening to the wood boards creak with every step from whatever had just broken down the door. Whoever this was had to be sadistic, was trying to mess with me and not just to rob me. That's up until I heard the sniffing and the footsteps switched to crawling that came closer and closer until it was on the other side of the bathroom door.
I smell you,
The voice said deeply. Chills ran up and down my body while I was gripping the metal rod, getting ready for the door to be broken down just like the front door was. So I sat there waiting to fight for my life, when I heard a voice call for me saying, "Mr. Miller, are you there? I heard you were planning on staying over the winter, and I'm sorry but you're not allowed to. Are you in there? What happened to your door?" I didn't know what to do. Should I warn whoever was out there? Or was it just another trick of whatever this thing is? I took a deep breath and knew I couldn't just stay where I was. I unlocked the door and swung it open so fast, just in case I could hit whatever was outside of it. As I did, I felt the door hit something, and so I shoved the door even harder until I heard someone winch out in pain. I pulled back the door to see a park ranger laying on the ground. I quickly looked around to see if anything else was there just waiting to attack me. But lucky for us, I didn't see anything. "Are you okay?" I asked the park ranger who I tried to help out. Yeah," he said while rubbing his head before continuing. "The real question is, are you okay? What's going on here? I thought you got attacked by a bear or something with the sides of this cabin all scratched up, especially with that door being knocked over and letting in all this cold. Honestly, I don't know what was here. I never saw it, but it sounded like another person. Are there any other vehicles out there besides mine and yours?" "No, I don't remember seeing any more," he replied. "No one else is up here besides us, because this area is closed during the winter. We got a call from the power company informing us that you were still up here and were requesting power over the winter. Look, we don't want to kick you out of your own cabin, but we have these rules to keep everyone safe. Now, we need to get the fuck out of here, right now." "I get it, but what's the rush? I still need to clean this place up and fix that door, and there's no time. We already been here long enough and we need to leave. Your vehicle won't be able to make it down, so just hop into my vehicle and we can get out of here." "You can't expect me to just up and leave everything here, do you?" I asked. "If you want to live, plus, you can come back once winter ends, but we need to leave before that thing comes back." "Wait, are you talking about that thing that knocked down my door? You know about it. What is it?" The park ranger looked at me and just shook his head, while his eyes opened, and said, "All you need to know is that we need to get the fuck out of here." He then grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the front door. While we were leaving, I could hear scratching coming from the back wall again. I ignored it as we ran out and hopped into his Jeep. He drove down the snowy mountain, trying his best to keep the Jeep from sliding off the side. While he drove, I started to ask him, "So what was that thing that broke down my door?" And don't try to sugarcoat it at all, or tell me it was a bear, because there ain't no bear that can mimic a human voice like that. The ranger sighed before saying, "I guess you already know enough that it won't make a difference if I told you what we already know. But to be honest, we're just as confused as you are on what that thing is. We've been trying to figure it out over the years, but every time we leave people in this area over the winter to investigate, they all go missing, and there's no explanation of who or what did it." "Really? So I'm not losing my mind at all. What else do you know about it?" "Nothing more than what I already said. Besides, the fact that this thing only seems to come out during the winter. That's the main reason we have the rule for all the people who own cabins in this area, that they're not allowed to stay here during the winter like you. We blame it on the snow and the cold winters. And that's the reason they can't come up to their cabins all year long. And don't get me wrong, both of those things are good reasons. It's just that the main reason is because of that thing. We have no idea on how to deal with it. So we've been following these rules since the 1950s, when somebody first saw it." Upon hearing this, I sat there motionless, not knowing if this guy was trying to mess with me, simply because I never actually saw this creature. And what if it was him the whole time? Plus, when I opened the bathroom door, I hit the guy, and that's exactly where that creature was just moments before. I kept wondering this, until I started to hear faint scratching coming from the back of the Jeep. Back when I was young, my old man and I would go hunting with my older brother and sister out in Kerrville. I remember the trailer would sometimes smell like that rusty blood smell, but we always got used to it. Aside from all of this, there was some scary stuff that always happened out there. I remember when I was 12 or so, and my dad had shot a deer right behind the shoulder, but it managed to get away, so we had to go track it. It was around mid-November, and it was starting to get dark, so I had my SKS, which I had been killing deer with since I was young. I also had a flashlight with me. Being crafty, my dad put me in this valley where we found a pretty good pool of it, and I sat on top of a boulder just to mark the spot while he took my brother and put him further out past the tree line, deep along the ravine. There were tons of rocks and boulders all over the place, so I got up on a boulder that had a pretty good viewpoint. It also had a decent clearing of about 50 to 75 yards around me. Well, the night started to set in, and it was about 50 or so degrees, eventually dropping even more. I was in the middle of this clearing with a light overcast and a full moon. I remember clicking the light off to save the battery and letting my eyes adjust to my surroundings. Just about 30 or 40 minutes after my brother and my dad left me, I remember hearing some coyotes and seeing them on the outskirts of the clearing. However, they weren't circling. They paused for a bit to look, and when they continued on, I sat quietly on the boulder, watching nature go by, with the wind picking up slowly, giving a gentle strobing effect with the cloud overcast, just switching with light to no light. I heard the coyotes yip and howl a few times, and then they started to fade away. Minutes after that, I heard a resounding shot and a report of impact like a boom. I figured that they either found the deer and put it down, or someone shot a coyote. Around that time, I heard a scream, which actually got me worried, then just silence. The wind stopped howling, the pine tree stopped rustling. I couldn't hear any of the coyotes in the distance again, just dead silence. After a bit, I started hearing some light sounds on my right, almost like rocks banging together. Up a ways along the hillside on the furthest distance, about 75 yards of the clearing, I saw a few rocks rolling down the side. I watched them when they first came into view, bouncing along, tumbling. Then, I got real low on the boulder with my SKS, ready, aiming at the point of the sound. A few more rocks did the same thing from the same spot, and that's when I saw a dark outline through the trees. Not quite in the clearing, but rather a few yards deep in the trees. I saw a pair of antlers when the light picked it back up, and then it went dark. I could hear some heavy breathing along the edge of the clearing. I was starting to think it was an injured deer. I keyed the radio that we all had 3 times to signal distress so that my dad and brother would come back. I turned the volume really low, and I sat quietly on the rock, making sure not to silhouette myself as I peered into the darkness with my scope, trying to get a good picture. I remember seeing the outline somewhat upright in the light, like it was a buck that stretched his neck out. Then it would get dark, and then nothing. I did panic a bit despite just being 12, knowing the hoofs of a deer should clack pretty loud if they moved at all, especially if it was that quiet. So I sat and waited, not moving a muscle as that pool of blood next to me seemed to lazily waft itself into my nose. It wasn't overpowering or anything, but it cut in pretty strong as I scanned again when the clouds cleared up for a few moments, looking for anywhere that this thing could have gone. My radio keyed back twice, meaning somebody wanted to talk. I keyed 3 times again, and I saw lights over on my left shoulder where my dad and brother went down to track after the buck, still a few hundred yards or so off in the distance. I sat there alone, jittering quietly in the cold, with a lingering hope that my dad and brother would catch up. The light went out again, and I could hear those rocks rolling just a bit from a spot just a little further up the hill, but a few yards closer. The rocks rode into vision when the cloud passed, and I looked up. I could see a dark figure again with some antlers, 60-something yards away, with a few trees in between. Knowing where my brother and dad were, I leveled out the rifle and I started to wait for a clear shot. I stepped out, and I was a hair away from the trigger falling when it went dark. So I waited patiently for the moon to come out again. When it did, whatever was out there had disappeared. It didn't take much sense considering that it was behind a few trees with some considerable openings to each side. I scanned again in the same direction when the wind picked back up, and the tree started to move, with the hillside coming alive again. I heard the footsteps of my family behind me, around 90 yards out, and I slowly crept off the boulder to go meet them, keeping that rifle close to me the whole time. When we met, my brother started giving me crap about how I was screaming and crying about being all alone. When I told them that I hadn't made a sound, they raised their eyebrows and started claiming that I was full of BS. I asked about the shot that I heard, and apparently it was a ways off in the next property over. Since we were on the property line, they found a pretty good blood trail that left the original spot of where I was in just about a straight line all the way to some crushed brush and about 400 yards out. Having this deer bleed that much this whole time was somewhat unreal. Then, after the trail ended, they moved around a few thousand yards or so just to scan the area where they heard the shot, and it sounded like it was over the low fenced line. I told them about seeing what I could describe as a deer, except that it left without me getting a good look at it. We hiked back up the hill in a staggered column, with my brother picking up the rear with his firearm, and with my dad leading. We made our way back to the truck. When we got there, my brother Cody and I hopped in the bed of the truck, with him overlooking the cabin and me looking over the tailgates, and we started our way down a pretty long trail to the camp house. After a mile or so, we had to take a detour through the brush because a few trees had collapsed on the trail, so we started going around through some clearings in the dodge. Just before we got back onto the trail, it got real tight with the trees, and we had to get ahead and walk in front of the truck to make sure it could fit. After getting everything cleared out, we assumed the same spots on the truck, and just when we're about to get back to the road, that's when I spotted another pair of different antlers nestled between the brush. At that moment, I hollered to my dad, who was with his windows rolled down. He took out his 1911 at the center console and blasted a buck between the eyes with a 230 GRHST. It turns out that this was the deer he was looking for, but it ended up a few miles down the path with a hard shot, which is pretty impossible. It looked like it had a good gouge on it, just a bit between the point of impact on the ribs, like it had fallen on punchy sticks or something. There was no blood trail anywhere near, just that deer standing between two bushes by itself. We did load it up in the back of the truck, and I sat on top of it with my SKS pointed at its head for the rest of the night. Everything went according to plan after that. We ended up skinning the deer up and iced the meat. However, over the next 8 years or so, my brother and I would still hear some screams on our hunting trips at night. There shouldn't be any people around for the next 10 or so miles. I forgot to mention that there are all kinds of burial grounds and stuff like that on the land. We found many piles of old arrowheads, Victorian era utensils, and some old burned down houses that had been there since the settlement of Texas. I told my sister about what happened, with her being the oldest of all of us, and she started joking about it being a Wendigo, as the Native Americans would call it. I think she was just teasing me though, but I'm not so sure it's a joke out there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I never did have another encounter like that, but there were always certain things on that land that would creep me the fuck out. We would find an old stone building with just piles of skulls of animals stacked to the ceiling, filling the room up. So if you ever visit Texas, be mindful of the roads that you come across. Or if you're familiar with Texas, then you know that there are some country roads that go on for hours with nothing in sight. There are some lands that contain some things that are creepy and evil. This story happened when I was 12. I currently live on the Navajo Res. However, I used to live in a remote area in a trailer, and for some background about where I live, the only town near me was a 45-minute drive. We would always run into town for some food when we would have family visit. We always started the drive back when the sun was starting to go down, which meant that our headlight was the only source of light. One day we did the usual, but on the way back, this time something seemed off. It felt like we were being watched. Me being the bored 12-year-old, I put my earbuds in and looked out the window. As I was looking out the window, I saw a black shadow by the car. Then suddenly, a harsh smell came through my open window. I'm not sure how to describe the smell, but now that I think about it, I know this is going to sound crazy, but it smelled like death. As I focused more on this shadow, I recognized that it looked like a dog. I then hurried and closed my windows with a sense of fear and panic, tears forming in my eyes knowing that we were being followed by a skinwalker. I told my mom, who soon pressed the gas, since she also smelled the bad stench as well. This thing was following us, and after a few seconds, the figure and the smell disappeared. Thinking that we were finally safe, we arrived home. When we got off the vehicle, the smell suddenly came back. Then, we heard rustling in the woods beside our home. We then rushed inside, and in the midst of all this, our dog started to bark and growl. We finally made it inside, shut the doors, shut the blinds, the curtains, and my mom said a prayer. At this point I was so scared that I started to cry as we put the groceries away, ignoring what was outside. Out of the whole chaos and everything going on, I didn't even realize the smell was gone. A few hours passed and everything seemed to go back to normal. The dog stopped barking, and we were all getting ready to go to sleep. As I was laying down, thinking about what we had just experienced, I heard a big noise on our roof. It sounded like something big and heavy had jumped on the roof, and then footsteps, like if someone or something was walking back and forth. Then the footsteps stopped, and I kid you not, the most loudest banging noise in the roof like I never heard before. At this point, everyone had already woken up. We all got up and ran to my parents' room. By that time, my father already had his 2020 gun. My father loaded it and went outside, looking for the creature or whatever it was. Me being the stubborn person that I am, even now, never listening when they said to stay in, as I wanted to be where my father was at. So of course I followed him outside and was on the front porch steps. That's when I felt an urge to look up, and as I did, I saw red eyes looking back at me. I screamed as my dad started to shoot at the creature. My father then screamed at me to run inside, and I did, with him running right behind me. As we were inside, we heard footsteps and loud noises in the roof all night. We also all ended up staying in the same room. I'm not sure what else happened that night, as I remember waking up the next day, and we found one of my dogs dead, and footprints in the dirt that seemed to turn from a cow to a human as you followed the footsteps. And from that point forward, I never went against what my parents tell me again. This story comes from a friend of mine. It's a true experience. He told me this, and I simply have to tell it. My friend is a Native American. He's part of a tribe who settled the Pacific Northwest coast. He's quite the character. For one, he is 6'10" and has the blackest eyes you could imagine. He always has this frowning face going on, which makes him even more intimidating. But he's everything but a bad guy. In fact, he is the most gentle of all giants. He was working at a gas station up north back in 1992, and he pretty much always worked the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. when he was relieved. Business wasn't exactly booming at nights, so he was always watching TV or reading magazines between customers, and they were only a few. The area he lived and worked in was deeply associated with all things Native American. There was a sense of pride in the surrounding communities, but also a very distinct presence of superstition and old traditions. My friend was no exception. He was a firm believer of the ways of the old. This made his encounter that I'm about to tell you about more terrifying. One night, he was sitting as usual, watching TV when a customer entered the gas station. The customer paid for his gas, a pack of smokes, and some soda, and then returned to his car. Nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary. But as my friend looked out the window towards the customer's car, he spotted what looked like a huge dog sitting by the edge of the woods. Now, the window is located on the side of the building, some distance from the sliding door, overlooking the pumps and the roof covering it. On the sides of the roof are pretty strong lights, which shine into the gas station. This gives the gas station not only some eerie lights, with the blinds casting long, striped shadows, but also blinds the teller to an extent. As he peered through the window trying to focus on the dog, it was now gone. He didn't think much of it, even if it was a wolf. He was inside, and these animals don't tend to rob gas stations at night. However, wolves are common here, but this one wolf was fucking huge. He brushed it off and returned to his mindless watching of the TV. A couple of hours go by and not a single customer has entered since the last one. He was just about to refill some condiments when he heard a loud noise coming from the back. It wasn't inside, he could hear that, but it came from the back and from behind the building that they keep the garbage. The gas station had been visited before by scavenging homeless, but my friend didn't really care. It was in his garbage, and it was just garbage. Let them take it. But it kept getting noisier. He decided to grab a flashlight and a gun from the office and circle around the back to tell whoever ventured there to leave, as he's had enough. His presence alone would have scared off anyone. but he wanted to feel safe just in case. He exited through the sliding doors, walking past the window he was just sitting by. As he turned the corner, he shines the light towards the dumpsters. As the cone of light hits the dumpsters, my friend instantly drops the flashlight and the gun. It's the huge dog he saw before, going through the garbage. It wasn't a dog. It clearly stood on its hind legs, reaching the same height as himself. It couldn't be a bear. The creature's eyes had been glowing in the light of the flashlight, making it even more terrifying. He quickly ran inside a gas station, and he wasn't followed. He locked the door, stayed inside the whole night, and quit the next day. My friend is still convinced that he saw a skinwalker, a shape-shifting demon of sorts that are a common occurrence in Native American lore and culture. I do apologize for the absence of blood, but believe me, this is a really creepy, true story. We had a tradition of going to see my grandfather every summer and spend some time at his cabin. The cabin by a lake, and older than he is. The cabin is a load of fun for a child spending their carefree summer. The one thing I disliked about the cabin was there was no indoor washroom. A shower was set up outside. An outhouse a few steps off into the woods was the worst thing about the cabin. I hated using that thing. Bugs always took over the inside, and I had a fear of something reaching up to grab me if I sat down. We begged my grandfather to get indoor plumbing. He only got a tub hooked up, but his water heater could only handle so much, so we were banned from using it in the summer. The place was just barely held together. It would be cheaper to buy a new cabin than to renovate it, but we still went every year, always forgetting the negatives, until we finally arrived. Even my father complained about the outhouse, and he never really complained about anything. My grandfather also had a rack of hunting rifles and one shotgun. He told all of us to never touch them, and to respect the weapons. He left the cabinet they were inside locked, his guns unloaded, and the ammo hidden somewhere in the cabin. He took no chances with the guns around a bunch of kids. He always said he would whoop some ass if he ever saw us touching them, and told us it was because he loved us and didn't want an accident to happen. I asked why he kept the guns. I didn't see him using them very often aside from shooting a deer or two. I would see him go off into the woods while we swam with a rifle on his shoulder, but he normally never came back with some animal he shot. I don't think he would kill something to waste, leaving it behind. Or did I think he was a bad shot? He may walk slowly, but his eyesight was better than ours. He always knew what might be going on. One time, my cousin found a cigarette someone dropped near the corner store, where we sometimes got ice cream snacks. He kept it hidden for a day. When he thought that the coast was clear, he used one of the lighters for the fire pit. He didn't even take a drag before our grandfather came out yelling at him, scaring us all to death. With 3 kids crying, begging him not to tell our parents, he gave us mercy. As long as we cleaned the boat we've been putting off all weekend. Overall, my grandfather was a scary man. One night, after telling each other ghost stories to freak each other out, the worst thing happened. When everyone else was dead asleep, I needed to use the restroom. I hated going out at night. It might be only a few steps, and yet it felt like a mile walk. Things croaked off in the woods, which were perfectly normal noises for a forest. When you're a kid, full of ghost stories and listening to these things, those noises turned into killers and ghosts waiting to scoop you up. I went through the cabin to the back door, knowing that I couldn't hold it until morning. There was a flashlight by the door. I turned it on only to have it flicker off. It was the kid's job to make sure the flashlight had new batteries. Sometimes we switched them to out the good ones in the shared Game Boy for a few more hours of playtime. It finally came back to bite us. However, since the full moon was out, I had taken the path 100 times before, so I went on without the flashlight. I feared what my grandfather would do if I woke him up trying to find new batteries. Slipping on my shoes, I went off in the backyard and down the short path to use the washroom. I heard a noise, and I looked over my shoulder and walked faster, fearing what might be looking at me in the dark. That was a mistake. Going without a flashlight and not paying attention to where I was going could have killed me that night. The longer I walked, the more afraid I was. It should not take this long to get to the outhouse. Another crack of a twig made me jump. I could no longer hold it and needed to step off the path to do my business and carry on. I hated going to the washroom out in the woods. At least it was quick, and I was back on the path towards the cabin. But was I? Nothing looked right. The trail appeared too overgrown. I didn't understand how I had gone so far off the path. In my mind, I went the right way the entire time, and I only got lost when I stepped aside. Fear nearly froze me to the spot, forcing my body to move. I started going down where I thought I had came from, praying to find the path again. At this point, I called out for someone to come and get me. A sound came, and I shut my mouth. Heart beating so fast that it hurt. I looked around trying to see what was stalking a poor scared kid in the dark. Something flew at me. Wings flapping and a screeching cry made me snap. That's when I ran, screaming, trying to get away from whatever this thing was. Only when I stopped running and was very lost, I realized I just got scared by a bat. Just a normal, harmless bat. I wanted to cry. Unless someone noticed I wasn't in my sleeping bag when they woke up to go to the bathroom as well. No one would know I was missing until morning. How long would it take until someone did notice? I skipped breakfast pretty often. They might even assume I was just sleeping in. I didn't want to stay out in the woods overnight, having no other options or ideas of what to do while lost. I kept walking while trying to force back my tears. I had forgot it was best to stay in one spot while being lost in the woods. Just going deeper in them wasn't the best idea. I felt cold, scared, and was getting bit by bugs. My heart almost broke over the idea of being out there forever, starving to death, and no one ever knowing what happened. Thinking back to the books I needed to read in school, I wonder if I could live out in the woods until they found me. If I find clean water and could figure out how to make a fire, I might be able to. The issue being, I never actually started a fire without a lighter. I tried with sticks, but it always took too long, and we always gave up. Me and my cousins loved burning things and were impatient. There was always a lighter to use. I wanted to try and find the cabin until the sun rose. If I still was in the woods by tomorrow night, I would buckle down to figure out how to make fire. Wait, wouldn't someone smell the smoke and find me sooner? Or would I burn the entire forest down? Getting motivated, I started to look for a clearing that I could use for a fire pit. It took a while, but I found a spot where the ground looked to be mostly dirt. It took longer to find a stone I could use to start digging out a hole in the dirt for my fire pit. My hands cold and the rock cut into my fingers a few times. Then, I needed to find the right sticks to get the fire started. And then finally, get enough wood to keep it going if I did get one started. I didn't go out of sight of the clearing, as I collected what I needed. Exhausted by the time I thought I was ready, my pit was filled with dry leaves and small sticks. I sat down ready to try to get a fire started. I used 2 sticks I peeled the bark off at first. My hands became raw from rubbing them together. Frustrated, I didn't think I could get them warm enough from the friction to get anything started. I then tried a rock method. I didn't know if any rocks would do, or if my grandfather had a special type in his fire starting kit. A miracle of the night happened when I found the right rocks to smash together. One spark caught and I nearly fainted when the leaves burned and yet didn't catch fire. I kept trying until I had a very small flame that I actually fed with my breath. I've never been so proud of myself in my entire life. The smoke blew into my face, causing me to cough and eyes water. Still very happy for my very small fire though. There wasn't a way to tell how long I was out there for. The sun hadn't even risen yet, so at least a few hours. As I warmed myself by the flames, I heard something off in the distance of the woods. I heard it again. My chest got tight with hope when I recognized that the noises I was hearing were human voices. No one I knew, but still someone out here in the woods with me. With my fire still going, I would be able to see my way back to the clearing if needed. I hurried off towards the voices, so happy I couldn't speak.
Mine.
The voices were a warning for the person they were speaking with. It sounded strange, as if English wasn't their first language. Still, it was someone who could help. At least, that's what I thought. Rushing into another clearing, all my excitement faded when I saw what belonged to those voices. A dead, torn to pieces deer sat in the middle of the small clearing, blood soaking the grass and leaves. In the clear moonlight, I saw 3 pale things, figures, all hunched over in the deer, tearing in with their hands and teeth. All their limbs were skinny and far too long for their bodies. Each of them were pushing aside each other, trying to eat as much of the deer as they could. Skin pale and drawn tight against their bones, faces covered with blood. Each of them bald, with a mouth far too large for their face. And their eyes, oh God, their eyes were missing. Each of them had black empty sockets. None of them noticed me. That is, until I let out a scream. All 3 heads darted up. Now knowing there was some fresh prey, I turned to run. Sounds from behind me said they were all starting to chase me. Tears came to my eyes, making it nearly impossible to see where I was going. I slammed into a tree hard enough to hit my arm to the point I thought it was broken. I tumbled to the ground, crying in pain. My moment of weakness enough for one creature to get on top, limbs on either side. The head looking around trying to hear where I was, the large mouth opening, dripping blood on my tear-stained face. The moment before the mouth filled with teeth tore my face off, a loud cracking sound echoed through the forest. The creature blown off. I screamed even more when a powerful hand grabbed my shoulder to drag me to my feet. Grandpa. I choked up when I saw him clearly through my wet eyes. He was holding a shotgun, ready to fire again. His face stern, not afraid or surprised of the creatures. I expected them to attack us. They somehow knew what the gun could do. Grabbing their dead, they dragged it deeper into the darkness. The moment they were out of sight, I heard the worst noise. Awful sounds of bones cracking and breaking. They were eating the one my grandfather had shot. It was all too much for me. I broke down crying, my grandfather silently bending over to pick me up in one arm. As he carried me through the woods, he stomped out my small fire on the way out. He didn't scold me for crying or getting lost. Him actually comforting me that night was the kindest moment we ever shared together. We arrived back by the time the sun was rising. My mother and father awake and worried out of their mind. They scooped me up when we arrived, and I cried all over again. Before we left, I was able to get my grandfather alone to ask him what happened. Those things wouldn't bother us at the cabin. I only saw them because I went too far in the woods. Apparently, he had a deal with them, that they were not to touch any humans as long as he fed them, and he also wasn't sure how many of them lived in the woods, or even what they were. He also said that he fully understood if I didn't want to come back to the cabin next year. I almost didn't, until he passed away of natural causes. I spent parts of my summer at the cabin. He wasn't able to get an indoor toilet, but he did mark the path to the outhouse with those solar charged lamps that people use in their garden to make sure that no one ever goes off the path again. When we first moved into my grandpa's old cabin, I had a few obvious reasons to be afraid. First of all, I was 12 years old. Second, we moved in because our old house had burned down while we were away on vacation. And finally, my grandpa was a sick, old man. Not in the sense that he had some sort of illness. Well, I suppose he did. But that illness is what ended up killing him, giving us that forsaken cabin. But in the sense that he was batshit insane. When I was younger, my grandfather would tell me horrible stories about the cabin he lived in and the woods around it. He would tell me stories of the natives who lived in the forest, something about them being cursed by God for worshipping false gods, being turned into the trees themselves, if you look closely, while not looking at all. My sadistic grandpa would say that you can still see the trees move, and if you listen carefully, you could even hear them singing their worship for their false gods. I, of course, assumed he was just crazy and was trying to scare me from wandering off in the woods, and possibly also to motivate me to go to church. But still, since I was 8 freaking years old and all, I would sometimes see a branch twitch in the wind, or hear the faint noise of a distant animal, and I would worry it was one of the natives that my grandpa would go crazy over. But of course, the stories didn't finish there. Not only was this cabin the original home to a clan of witches, but also home to a cannibal and at least 2 serial killers and a family that used to worship the devil. To make the whole illusion complete, my grandpa made up a story how he won the cabin in a game of Russian roulette against one of the previous owners. All of these stories never truly scared me. They terrified me when I thought about one of them too much, but I was actually never fearful of the stories being true. Well, except for one story that my grandfather told me. He said before the cabin was built that the natives used the area for human sacrifices, offering up human flesh and blood not only for their gods, but for creatures they believed that dwelled in the woods. These creatures, my grandfather would say, were known by many names in all kinds of folklore: Wendigos, the Jersey Devil, demons, white walkers, skinwalkers, the goat man. But my grandpa would always call them Marchar de Poule. It's French for skinwalker. These beings of divine or mystical power were known to feed off anything from human flesh and blood to a human soul, or even fear itself. The skinwalker would stalk their prey throughout the woods they inhabited if the sacrifice given was not enough to feed their hunger. They always attacked groups of people, never a single person. That's the reason why my grandfather said that he lived alone. The skinwalkers would play with their food, often turning their form to look human to trick and torment anyone they sought to feed off, before finally killing them. My grandfather said once they finished feeding off of anyone unlucky enough, they would peel the skin from bone and wear it like a suit, often visiting the families of the dead to further torment mankind. The reason the story scared me so much was because I truly believed I saw one. When I was 8, I was playing in the backyard of the cabin. My grandfather sitting on the back porch, smoking his pipe and humming some old tune. He told me he was going to go inside and fetch some more tobacco, and he warned me not to go too close to the woods. I nodded and kept doing whatever I was doing at the time. After a few minutes, I felt the air around me turn cold, and everything seemed to get heavier, and I began to smell something like pennies, and the cold grew stronger. I realized it smelled exactly like blood. I felt a chill run up my spine, and I nearly gagged on the metallic taste that lingered in my mouth. I was about to stand and move back inside the cabin when I heard a soft laugh faintly beyond the tree line. I realized it sounded just like my own laugh, but now I was already scared. So scared I could hardly move at all. The smell of copper grew so strong that I thought I might pass out. But then, just out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I swallowed my spit and slowly turned to see a little boy standing just in front of the forest. I was almost relieved until I saw his eyes. They were pure white with no pupil, just pure white. I felt my knees buckle under me, and my lip began to quiver when it smiled at me. But when it smiled, the teeth were missing, and it was just a set of black, rotting gums that I could smell from several yards away. It lurked ahead, doubling over, seeming to hack and gag and laugh all at the same time. Then, it bent backward, placing its hands on the ground, and looked at me from between its legs. I swear I could hear bones break and crack as it began to crawl backwards into the forest, all the while making this gagging, laughing sound. That's when I passed out and wet my pants. I woke up a few minutes later from my grandfather gently shaking me up. The smell had magically disappeared, and there was no evidence of the creature I had saw just a few minutes ago. I told my grandfather what I had saw, and he grew so pale he almost looked like the little boy's eyes. He drove me back to my house, not saying a word the whole way. I told my parents what happened, and I was assured I must have just fell asleep and dreamed the whole thing. So eventually, that's what I convinced myself had happened. It still haunted my dreams, but I was convinced it was my imagination, and my grandfather's old stories were just getting to me. But then, we moved into my grandfather's cabin. Since we had lost all of our belongings in the fire, we had nothing to unpack. Even though I had convinced myself that I dreamed what I saw all those years ago, I was still worried about living there for an extended period of time. My parents let me watch some movies we rented while they were cleaning the cabin that had been vacant since my grandfather died when I was 10. Eventually, I dozed off. I woke up on the couch a bit surprised I had fallen asleep for so long. As I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, I became aware of the tapping that was coming from the front door, almost as if someone was knocking with their fingertips. Even though I had no real idea what it was, I got up to check on it. Then, I smelled it again. That heavy, thick, bloody smell that had lingered in the back of my mind for 4 years. It got so cold so fast I could see my own breath. I felt my heart thumping in my chest, and that same shiver run up my spine. I was so scared in that moment I thought I was going to break down and start crying. Then the tapping stopped. Then the smell grew worse. Beyond the front door I heard something gag and cough and laugh at the same time. My knees buckled and my lip quivered just like they did the first time. I became vaguely aware that I was slowly backing away from the door when I tripped and fell back onto the couch. Then I passed out again. Again, like the first time, I woke up from a hand gently shaking me away. I woke up and realized it was my dad looking down at me. It looked like he was out of breath, but I was so relieved he was there, and that the tapping on the door was all a dream. I then smiled at him, and he tried to do the same, but he only managed to get one side of his lips curled up. I was about to ask what was wrong when he scooped me up in his arms and told me in a hoarse voice that he was carrying me to my bed. His arms were so cold they felt like metal, but I didn't care, and I was already falling asleep again. He brought me to my room and laid me down in bed. His eyes were already closed and my mind was about to drift off. He leaned down and I felt his cold breath on my ear as my mind shut down, and he pulled away, and just before I fell back into sweet sleep, I heard my dad begin to cough. A few hours passed and I woke up again. I grew scared when I remembered the tapping on the door, but soon felt better when I remembered that it must have been a dream, and was thankful my dad woke me up to carry me to my room. I sat up in bed, still just a bit scared. I looked around my room, realizing that this was the first time I actually seen it since I had fallen asleep on the couch, before I even had a chance to check out my new room. It was almost pitch black, so I could hardly see anything. I gazed over to the wall and saw a mirror. It was hard to see, but I could make out my face and my upper body. I smiled at myself and saw my reflection smile back at me. Satisfied, I went back to sleep. In the morning, my dad again gently shook me awake. He said good morning and asked what I wanted for breakfast. I told him what I wanted and then thanked him for carrying me to the bed the night before. He looked at me, confused, and told me that he didn't, but I wasn't listening anymore, because when I looked at the wall, just as I had looked at it last night, I realized there wasn't a mirror in my room, only a window. This happened about a week and a half ago. I live in Washington State. I'm a 14-year-old male. I'm homeschooled, so I don't leave the house much, and I live with my mom and my dad. It was March 7, 2022, at about 12 a.m. I was just listening to the old Jenna Marbles and Julian podcast from like 3 years ago and playing some video games. I was kind of tired, and I had just finished eating a snack, so I went to go brush my teeth and wash my face. I did all my business in the bathroom and came back to my room. When I opened the door, my cat was up in his cat tower, which is right next to my window, and his back was arched up. His hair on his back was all up, and he was hissing, which I had never heard him do. I look out the window, and standing there is my dad. This gave me a relief for a second, until I realized it wasn't my dad. It was taller than my dad, and its smile was weirdly big. My dad never just smiles at me, and he's never came up to my window before. What the fuck is that? I said as I ran out my room, crying and shaking, obviously, because I never seen anything like that before. I went to my mom, who was sleeping on the couch, and I shook her awake. I told her to go check if my dad was in the bedroom, and she asked why, and I told her I would tell her after she checked, and indeed, he was sleeping in the bedroom. I told her what happened, and she sort of believed me, but sort of didn't. So she went into my room and checked out my window. Whatever it was gone. She checked all the other windows and doors, and nothing was there. She even grabbed my cat, and we slept on the couch that night, all together. Today was the first day I was able to go back into my room, March 17th, and I still haven't told my dad about it. I have no idea what it was that I saw, but the only thing I can think of is that it was a skinwalker. Anyway, I don't think I'll ever be able to forget this. And I'm still terrified that I'm gonna end up seeing it again. It's crazy. I looked behind my shoulder like 10 times while writing this. What the fuck? Two years ago, I went to go visit family up in North Minnesota around Labor Day weekend. I won't give the exact location, but will provide at least the general location where this happened. To keep it short, I'm hoping someone may have had a similar experience, or may have had a general idea what this theme or entity was walking around our tent. On that Labor Day weekend, my girlfriend and I were planning on spending time camping with her family. Both of us were very excited to get away from the everyday city life, and we anticipated a much needed low-key weekend. We arrived at their location around noon on Saturday, and were all greeted by everyone there. During the day and evening, we were enjoying ourselves with random fun activities, and catching up on how everyone was doing. As the night started to settle in, we were all near the campfire for a few hours until 11 p.m. Eventually, the family and ourselves called it a night, and we all headed to bed. My girlfriend and I were offered to sleep in a bigger size 6-person tent. It belonged to a relative who I will call Mary. It was a kind gesture at that time, as we only brought a 2-person sized tent. Having that additional space for our belongings and our air mattress was a nice added feature. Mary's tent was positioned not too far from the campfire and the rest of the family. The family did a wonderful job clearing and maintaining the area for their smaller RVs and additional tents. To the back of the tent, about 20 to 30 yards, is where the woods started with semi-thick brush and trees. Us three were laying down chatting, and eventually they both fell asleep. For some reason though, I couldn't sleep, so I was on my phone passing time, hoping to eventually drift off to sleep. This is when I heard a faint noise in the woods about 40 yards back. I dismissed it right away, as deer are known in this area, and I continued to space off on my phone looking at random things. About 10 to 20 minutes later, I heard something get closer to our tent. I could hear twigs snapping and moving between bushes getting closer to our area. This started to get my attention, as I could start physically feeling a faint shake in the ground as this thing was wandering around. Moments later, this thing was about 10 yards away from our area, walking, running back and forth. Whatever this thing was, with each step it took, I could physically feel the vibration from the ground. This thing was big, and the best way to describe this feeling is if you went to a live rock concert and you felt the kick drum hit your body. At this point, I was a bit terrified, as I was trying to follow the footsteps, walking or running at the back and the side of the tent. This thing got at least 5 yards near our area, and then suddenly it stopped where Mary was sleeping, near her tent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, scared of what this thing was going to do next. I shit you not, a few seconds later, Mary shot up from being dead asleep. She gasped for air and was calling our names to wake us up. You could hear her voice. She was terrified. This thing hightailed off back into the woods. Both of us were very startled at this point. The woods had become dead silent, and eventually we got enough courage to look outside. We saw and heard nothing, and about 30 minutes later, we ran to the shop to grab a shotgun. Another anomaly during this whole thing While we were alert and awake, Mary mentioned during this time I was awake that she was having a dream. She mentioned these things were tormenting her, saying they wanted her soul and to give it to them. My girlfriend dismissed the whole thing and said it was most likely just a deer, etc., running around. After hearing my girlfriend say that, I never told anyone about this story until recently, as I started to think about it again, trying to figure out what the hell this thing or entity was. The one and only time I went hunting was with my father when I was 11. My mom didn't work, so it was up to him to provide for us. My entire life he worked more than he was at home. When he did come home, he would drink in front of the TV, too exhausted to do anything. The years crept up on him, and he finally noticed how old I had gotten, and how I was already shaping up to be a disappointment in his eyes. I was small for my age. I stayed inside to read instead of playing sports. My body was so frail I got sick often. When he finally truly looked at me for the first time, he didn't recognize the son that lived in his house. Therefore, he thought that hunting would be the answer. If I would man up and shoot something, maybe I might grow into the person he wanted. We never really spent any time together. Hunting with my father felt like being stuck inside a forest with a stranger. What kind of person even enjoys camping? Was I even missing something? My father kept sipping away at a steel water bottle that I knew didn't have water inside. Without it, he never would have lasted the day. We caught no fish at the lake for lunch the first day. Trying out luck, we went into the forest trying to shoot something for dinner. We packed something to eat, but not much. My father worked hard. However, he was supporting all three of us on his own. I knew it would be four of us soon. My mom hadn't told him yet, and I wasn't sure how he would take it. I really prayed she would leave him. As heartless as that was to hope for, we could go to my uncle's house, so my father could be alone. Maybe retire in a few years without having to worry about supporting a family. Even as a child, I could see how much his job broke his body a little more every day. In my mind, my mother didn't have any kind of feelings for this stranger. Instead of going outside playing with neighborhood friends, I worried about my family's future. In the woods, hunkered down, my father waited for something to come into his sight. For the first time, he made the attempt to talk with me and teach me things. After a while, when he thought I could be trusted, he placed the rifle into my hands and let me get into position. It was far too big for my short arms and little hands. I was scared that if I shot it, the recoil would break my shoulder. I didn't know the first thing about guns. In the movies I had seen, they always had a powerful recoil. Line it up, our dinner's over there, my father whispered in my ear. A rabbit came into a clearing. He spotted it first, looking through the sight. I went through everything I had just learned. I only needed to pull the trigger. Such a simple little thing. My father would teach me more things patiently and be proud of me. The first hunting trip with his son would become a cherished memory. But it didn't go like that. I froze up. I just couldn't shoot the rabbit. Aside from not wanting to kill another living creature, I felt like if I shot it, I would be living a lie. My father would try his best to act like the person he should be, teaching me how to skin the rabbit and how to cook it. But he would not actually care about me. He never did. This trip would never turn into a family relationship he wanted. The small rabbit jumped off and out of sight to become a meal for something else. I eased up the grip on the rifle the moment before it was snatched from my hands. My father shot at the rabbit now hidden in the bush. Why didn't you shoot it? he hissed at me. When he got angry, his voice got low. He was never the type to yell and scream. I wonder if he did shout at me, I might be less scared of him. Whenever I had a nightmare, it was always the same. My father sitting in the living room in the dark, staring at the TV. I stood in the doorway looking at him, just waiting. The waiting crept dread into my bones. I hated the wait. I wish he would just finally scream at me. I couldn't stand his silent rage any longer. Go back to camp. You're useless. Those words should have done nothing to me. After all, this man wasn't my father. Not really. He was a stranger. And yet, I felt my face full of shame. But I still didn't regret not shooting the rabbit. I went back to the camp trying to make myself useful. I collected firewood. I cleaned up and did anything else that I thought would make my father happy. I heard the sound of a truck. We parked pretty close by, and my stomach sank at the thought of him just leaving me here. But our gear cost a lot of money. He will leave his son in the woods, but not things he worked hard for. For hours I was alone in the tent. I brought a book along. I nearly finished it by the time my father returned. He smelled drunk and like fast food. I knew he had gone into town for supper and a few drinks alone. I only ate a hot dog and a handful of marshmallows. The arrangement was fine by me. The rest of the night he spent by the fire, just drinking. The scene identical to how he spent time at home, just looking forward yet not taking anything in. He stayed outside even after night fell. I went back into our tent trying to sleep, finding it impossible. I thought about how things would change when my new sibling came, if they ever made it to that point. I feared that my father would try to make sure that he didn't have another mouth to feed. I wanted nothing more to get away from that man, even though in a way, he had never done anything to me. The nothing made me feel as if something was coming. At some point I fell asleep, but some rustling outside woke me up. In my drowsy state I sat up hearing my father's voice outside. Take him, please. Not me. He was crying. The man that I didn't know a thing about was crying. His voice was very faint, as if far away, more begging and pleading until I heard something that made me scramble into the corner of the tent. He finally broke the silence, and the noise I always dreaded came. He screamed, and just kept screaming as if his life depended on it. Clutching my knees to my chest, tears came to my eyes as I could do nothing but listen. Cracks from the rifle came. Whatever he was firing at, he missed, or it didn't care. The entire exchange only took a few minutes that felt like years. Finally, his voice drifted away, as if he was being dragged at a fast pace. At first, I wanted to stay inside the tent until morning. I cried hard until my throat felt raw and my eyes hurt. When my crying spell stopped, I decided to see if he dropped the rifle. I would need a weapon until I could leave when dawn came. I unzipped the tent only enough to peek outside. The dying fire did not give enough light to see by. I needed to go outside. Finding a flashlight, I carefully got out, hyper aware of every sound around me. Scanning the ground, I saw the hot dogs were still where I left them. If my father was attacked by a wild animal, why didn't they take these as well? Did the smell attract something, and decided a full-grown man would be a better meal? I saw no sign of the rifle, only tracks in the dirt where my father made his last stand. I felt sick because I realized he was coming towards the camp instead of the truck when he got snatched away. He was either trying to save me or wanted to use me as bait. Thinking the truck would be a better place to wait until the morning, I started to look around trying to find a trail towards it. I stopped when I heard a voice. Please, not me. Help. It sounded so hurt and awful but I knew that was my father calling out. For the first time in my life, he was trying to reach me. I abandoned the idea of the truck. I foolishly turned away and went towards the voice. For hours I walked in those woods getting hopelessly lost. I felt sick with fear. Anything could be in the dark, and I only had a small flashlight to protect myself. Whatever took my father easily overpowered a full-grown man. I didn't have a choice if it came across me. I would let my emotions take over and it might get me killed. Then again, I was only a child back then, so I shouldn't be too hard on myself. Please, please. The voice came from close by, very low and raspy, but still my father's voice. I had been walking for hours at that point. My small body wasn't meant to move this much in the cold, wet darkness. I knew a fever already coming, and wasn't thinking clearly as I walked towards the voice. I didn't even consider it may be someone else aside from who I wanted to find. Coming into a clearing, I started to look around with my flashlight. The small beam of light landed on something that made me choke on air. Someone killed a deer, skinned it, and hung it from a tree. In the darkness, that's what it looked like. I knew what a skinned deer looked like. It's what my mind wanted to see. The kill was so fresh, blood still dripped down onto the grass. I couldn't stop myself from starting to take a shorter and shorter breath when a whisper of a thought came to my mind that the body wasn't a deer. That's not him, I said out loud, only to myself. That's not him, it's a deer. It's a small deformed deer with small legs. Unable to stop myself, I suddenly hunched over and threw up my meal from hours before, mostly bile that stung my throat. Seeing such a sight in the dark made me completely snap. Instead of screaming, I started to laugh, on my knees alone, lost and scared beyond words. Weak chuckles at first, that turned into a cackling, that soon turned into heavy sobs that locked up my chest. It's not him. I was sobbing, holding myself, not being able to look at the body in front of me. After getting another few glances between tears, I saw how different the legs were compared to what deer legs should look like. I only held on to some hope it wasn't my father skinned and hanging from a tree, because I had just heard him a few minutes before entering the clearing. The kill was new, but skinning took a while, even if you knew what you were doing. In the next few moments, I saw why my hope was unfounded. I forced myself to stop crying when I saw a pale face in the dark on the other end of the clearing. The face looked at me through the trees, just beyond the skinned body. I opened my mouth to ask for help, but nothing came out aside from a croak. To my horror, the face came out of the trees with the rest of its terrible body. I didn't understand what I was seeing, even though the pale creature stood out in the darkness. I wanted to believe I was still in my tent dreaming this entire thing. The monster was a thing of nightmares. It was skinny, so much so I could see every bone in its body. It had arms so long they walked on its elbows, the rest of its arms folding backwards, sticking up above its head. The same was for its legs. It crawled on its knees, legs pointed up towards the sky. The pale thing saw me. Inhuman sunken eyes on a flat human-shaped face. Standing up, I thought I could run. It was still a few feet away, and judging from how deformed its body was, I doubt it could move very fast. I only got to take a single step back when it raised an arm. The rest of its arm snapped ahead, easily covering the distance of the clearing. I assumed it couldn't reach more with its entire arm because it was bent back, but I was mistaken. Twisted fingers grabbed the front of my shirt. I was dragged, too in shock to do anything. raising me up. I met those horrible black eyes. The smell of rotting breath nearly made me pass out. I was so small and frail I could do nothing to fight against this monster. Most likely my father was dead. It would skin me and eat me, and I couldn't do a damn thing about it. The whole situation was so bleak. I surprised myself over what I did next. I started to laugh again. The monster's features twisted in confusion. I still laughed until tears came back to my eyes. And that thing, whatever it was, copied me. It laughed my own voice back towards me, and we both ended up laughing until I physically couldn't any longer. I wish I had an explanation of how I escaped from that creature. I was told later that I had been found on a hiking trail. A week later, nearly starved to death. Even after my body recovered, my mind didn't. Everyone assumed I had killed my father in those woods, and the event just broke me. I wish I could believe that, and that the creature I had seen wasn't real. I don't remember the 2 years after I had been found. I ate and slept, not doing much else. One day, I weakly laughed at a joke I overheard. When the doctors found out I would react to any kind of comedy, they were able to get me to laugh myself back to a new normal. I remember seeing that monster in the woods. Then, I was with my mother and a new little sister. No memories in between. I haven't yet told her about that creature. They found some rope with my father's blood on it. However, they didn't know where his body was, or even how I got up into the tree to tie up that rope to start with. The case was still open, and would be for the rest of my life. I do still want to give a warning to everybody about that thing in the woods. I'm sure it's still out there waiting. I don't know why it let me go. Maybe it was thankful I had given it the perfect voice to draw in others towards it. So if you ever go into the woods and you hear a child laughing, don't go towards it. That's actually the time to leave before it's too late.